Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Forgotten Honor. Major Riker Sullivan stood frozen in the doorway of his own home, the birthday decorations still hanging limply from the ceiling. After 14 months of deployment in one of the most dangerous regions of Syria, he had pulled every string possible to make it home for Cassidy's 16th birthday. His dress uniform was crisp despite the 20-hour journey. The small wrapped jewelry box in his pocket, carefully selected months ago through a series of video calls with a Dubai merchant. The house smelled different. Unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air, mixing with the remnants of birthday cake and the distinct scent of expensive whiskey, a brand Riker had never purchased. His daughter Cassidy stood with her back against the kitchen counter, her eyes cold and unfamiliar. The girl he had left behind wore braces and collected horse figurines. This stranger had dyed black hair, 3 piercings in one ear, and a hostility that hit him like physical force. "I came home from deployment to surprise my daughter on her birthday," Riker said, his voice smaller than he'd intended. "I pulled strings, Cass. I wasn't supposed to be stateside for another month." Cassidy's gaze flicked over his uniform with open contempt. "Finally, useless loser decided to show up. The birthday was better without you. Get lost." Each word struck him like individual rounds. Riker had faced enemy fire that hurt less than this. Before he could respond, movement from the hallway caught his attention. Audrey, his wife of 18 years, emerged from the shadows. Her hand was intertwined with someone else's, a man's. The stranger was tall with carefully styled salt and pepper hair and the confident stance of someone on familiar ground. "You heard her. Now move." Audrey's voice had an edge he'd never heard before. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light, jewelry he hadn't bought her. The stranger, later Riker would learn his name was Barrett Kessler, smiled with the smug satisfaction of a man who had already won. Riker took in the scene with the tactical assessment skills that had kept him alive in combat zones. Cassidy's new appearance, Audrey's hostile demeanor, the strange man's possessive stance in his home, the subtle changes in furniture arrangement, the missing family photos that once lined the entryway. His voice, when it finally came, was deadly quiet. "Understood." There was no explosion of anger, no shouting match, no desperate pleas. Major Riker Sullivan, decorated combat veteran with 3 purple hearts, simply turned and walked out, the birthday gift still in his pocket. What none of them saw was the steel that entered his eyes as he closed the door behind him. In his rental car, Riker didn't cry. He didn't scream. He made a phone call to an old friend from his first deployment, now a high-powered attorney in Washington. 14 minutes later, he called a battle buddy who worked in digital security. By evening, he had contacted his financial advisor. 24 hours later, there were 17 missed calls on his phone. One from a blocked number he recognized as belonging to Pearson and Wilcox, the law firm where Barrett Kessler was a senior partner. But Major Riker Sullivan had already gone dark, a skill he had perfected in hostile territory. Chapter 2, Shadows of the Past. Riker Sullivan had not always been the hardened soldier whose heart now beat with calculated vengeance. Growing up in a small town in Idaho with a father who worked the railroad and a mother who taught second grade, young Riker had been idealistic and trusting. He met Audrey Calloway during their sophomore year of college. She was studying business administration while he pursued a criminal justice degree on an ROTC scholarship. Audrey had been ambitious, razor-sharp, and breathtakingly beautiful. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Within 8 months, they were engaged, and Riker's military career began shortly after their wedding. The early years had been difficult but rewarding. They moved frequently, living in 4 states and 1 overseas posting before Cassidy was born. Audrey had initially supported his career, proud of his rapid promotions and growing reputation as a tactical specialist. When Cassidy arrived, everything changed. For a while, it seemed, for the better. Riker had never seen anything as perfect as his daughter's tiny fingers and bright blue eyes. He requested and received a training position that kept him stateside for the first 4 years of her life. But the war on terror expanded, and specialists like Riker became increasingly valuable. His deployments grew longer and more frequent. When he was home, he threw himself into being a father, teaching Cassidy to ride a bike, helping with science projects, coaching her softball team. What he didn't see, what he refused to see, were the warning signs. Audrey's growing resentment of military life, her increasingly lavish spending habits during his absences, the subtle way she began weaponizing Cassidy's affection during their rare arguments. During his third deployment, Audrey had started a small marketing consultancy that grew surprisingly successful. Riker had been proud of her entrepreneurial spirit, never questioning how a new business could afford the luxury car that appeared in their driveway or the expensive private school Cassidy began attending. Now, sitting in a Spartan extended-stay hotel room 30 miles from his former home, Riker pulled out a worn leather journal. It contained not sentimental writings but careful notes he'd made over the years. Observations about unexplained absences, questionable expenses, and subtle inconsistencies in Audrey's stories. For years, he had made excuses, buried his suspicions, chosen trust over investigation. He had wanted so desperately to believe in the family he fought to protect. That night, he added new entries to the journal, his handwriting precise and controlled. Then he opened his laptop and began the first phase of what would become known in military circles as Operation Homecoming. Meanwhile, across town, Barrett Kessler was becoming increasingly concerned by what his contacts in banking and real estate couldn't tell him about Major Riker Sullivan. The digital footprint of the soldier was disappearing at an alarming rate, and certain financial movements were triggering security protocols that even Kessler's considerable influence couldn't penetrate. "He's just a soldier," he reassured Audrey as she paced their bedroom, her face tight with worry. "He'll make noise, threaten, then settle for whatever divorce terms we offer." But even as he spoke, Kessler wasn't entirely convinced. Something about the cold, calculating quiet of Sullivan's departure struck him as ominous. As a high-stakes litigator, he had seen men at their breaking points. They raged, they threatened, they made scenes. Sullivan had simply said, understood, and vanished. That kind of controlled response came from only two types of men: those who were completely broken and those who were far more dangerous than they appeared. Kessler was beginning to suspect Sullivan might be the latter. Chapter 3. The First Domino. On day 3 of what Riker now thought of as his new life, he received a text from an unlisted number, Cafe Amaro. 1,400 hours. Come alone. An old friend. The cafe was small, tucked between a bookstore and a tailor shop in a part of town Riker rarely visited. As he entered, the smell of strong espresso and baked bread hit him. In the farthest corner sat a woman whose face he hadn't seen in person for nearly 9 years. "Hello, Major," said Lane Dawes, rising slightly as he approached. Despite being retired from naval intelligence for almost a decade, she still maintained the perfect posture and watchful eyes of someone who had spent her career analyzing threats. "Didn't expect to see you stateside," Riker said, taking the seat across from her. "I go where interesting problems develop." She pushed a file folder across the table. "And you, my friend, have become a very interesting problem." Inside the folder were photographs. Audrey and Barrett Kessler at various locations over the past 3 years. Paris, Cabo, even a cabin in Aspen that Riker recognized as belonging to his own brother-in-law. The timestamps showed these rendezvous occurred during his deployments. "How long have you been watching my wife?" Riker asked, his voice neutral. "I haven't been," Lane replied. "These came from Operation Lockstep." Kessler was under surveillance for suspicion of compromising classified negotiations in private military contracts. "Your wife was collateral monitoring." Riker's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the folder. Kessler was cleared. Lane continued, "But I thought you should know what kind of man you're dealing with. He specializes in stripping military personnel of their assets during divorce proceedings. He's ruthlessly effective and has connections throughout the military-industrial complex." "Why are you showing me this?" Lane leaned forward. "Because 14 years ago in Kandahar, you pulled my team out when everyone else wrote us off as acceptable losses. I pay my debts." She slid another folder across the table. "Kessler has vulnerabilities. Ethical gray areas his firm has exploited. Nothing illegal enough for prosecution, but damaging if exposed the right way." Riker didn't touch the second folder immediately. "I'm not looking to destroy him, Lane." Her smile was cold. "Yes, you are. You just don't know it yet." Later that evening, Riker received a call from his commanding officer, Colonel Hale. "Sullivan, what the hell is going on? I've got judge advocate lawyers asking about your service record, and some silk-stocking civilian attorney trying to rush through paperwork to freeze your assets. Family situation, sir. Nothing that will affect my duty status. Bullshit. When a decorated officer suddenly transfers his accumulated leave, liquidates investments, and goes to ground immediately after returning from deployment, it becomes my business. The colonel's voice softened slightly. Whatever's happening, handle it legally. I don't want to see your career destroyed over domestic problems. Understood, sir. And Sullivan, remember the Fallujah rule. Riker smiled grimly at the reference. During their most intense urban combat operations, Colonel Hale had implemented what became known as the Fallujah rule. Never engage without overwhelming force, perfect intelligence, and multiple extraction plans. Always, sir. That night, Riker made a list of everyone who had abandoned, betrayed, or manipulated him. Audrey and Kessler topped the list, but there were others, former friends who had clearly known about the affair, family members who had maintained the deception, even his daughter Cassidy, though he placed a question mark next to her name. Next to each name, he wrote a single word, understood. The next morning, he began implementing the first phase of a plan that would eventually leave 17 people scrambling to contact him. Too late to stop what he had set in motion. Chapter 4. Invisible Hands. 5 weeks after his disastrous homecoming, Riker Sullivan sat in the office of Thaddeus Woodward, a gray-haired financial forensics specialist whose cluttered office belied his razor-sharp mind. It's impressive, Major Sullivan, Woodward said, scrolling through columns of data on his monitor. Most spouses in your situation make emotional moves, emptying joint accounts, hijacking credit cards, petty financial retaliations. You've been remarkably surgical. I learned in combat that emotion gets people killed, Riker replied. What's your assessment? Woodward removed his reading glasses. Your wife and her boyfriend thought they were being clever. The marketing company was real enough, but it served as a convenient way to justify sudden income increases and launder certain expenses. He turned the monitor toward Riker. See these real estate holdings? 3 properties purchased in the last 2 years, all in corporate shells that trace back to Kessler's private holdings. Down payments came from accounts funded by your military salary and benefits. Riker's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. How much of my money did they steal? Directly? About $180,000. But the legal structure they created entitles you to much more. Woodward's smile was predatory. They were playing checkers. We're going to play chess. Over the next 2 hours, they constructed a financial strategy that would be implemented in careful stages, designed not to recover assets quickly, but to create maximum long-term impact. Remember, Woodward cautioned as Riker prepared to leave, the goal isn't to bankrupt them. It's to ensure that every dollar they spend for the rest of their lives reminds them of what they did. Meanwhile, Audrey Sullivan was growing increasingly frustrated. The divorce papers she had expected Riker to be served with hadn't materialized. Instead, Barrett's legal team had encountered roadblocks in even locating Riker's current financial standing. It's like he's turned into a ghost, Barrett complained one evening, pouring himself his 3rd scotch. Military records suddenly classified, financial trails that lead nowhere. Who the hell is your husband really? He's just a soldier, Audrey insisted, but uncertainty crept into her voice. The Riker she thought she knew would have exploded with rage, made threats, eventually broken down, and agreed to her terms. This calculating silence was unlike him. Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Cassidy's school. Their daughter had been caught vandalizing school property and was suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. When they arrived at the school, they found Cassidy sitting stonily outside the principal's office, her makeup smeared by tears. What were you thinking? Audrey hissed. Cassidy looked up, her expression a mixture of defiance and confusion. I got a text from Dad. First time since he left. It just said he found my college fund paperwork and was making changes. Is he trying to ruin my life now? Barrett and Audrey exchanged alarmed glances. The college fund contained over $120,000 accumulated since Cassidy's birth. It was supposed to be untouchable until she turned 18. He can't touch that money, Barrett reassured them both. Those accounts are protected. But later that night, after making several urgent calls, his confidence wavered. The structure of the account gave Riker unusual latitude, he admitted to Audrey. It's complicated, but essentially, he didn't remove the money. He altered the disbursement conditions. What does that mean? Audrey demanded. It means the money is still there for Cassidy's education, but only at certain institutions and under specific conditions that Riker defined. When they examined the modified terms, they discovered the fund would now only pay for education at military academies or colleges with ROTC programs, where Cassidy maintained a 3.5 GPA and completed community service hours with veterans organizations. It was just the beginning of what would become a carefully orchestrated campaign, not of destruction, but of control. Chapter 5. The Architect's Blueprint. You need to understand what you're really dealing with, said Malcolm Reed, sliding a bourbon across the weathered bar top to Riker. They were meeting in a nondescript veterans bar 2 states away from Riker's former home. Malcolm had served with Riker in their early years before transitioning to a specialized role in military counterintelligence. Now retired, he maintained connections throughout the intelligence community. Barrett Kessler isn't just some ambulance chaser who seduced your wife, Malcolm continued, his voice low. His law firm represents defense contractors, private security companies, and technology firms with military contracts. He cultivates relationships with military spouses during deployments. You're not the first officer whose wife ended up in his bed. Riker took a measured sip of his drink. Pattern behavior? Absolutely. We've identified 7 similar situations over the past decade. Always high-ranking officers with access to sensitive information or contracting influence. Always during extended deployments. Always the same approach, lavish attention, financial assistance disguised as business opportunities, gradual isolation from the military spouse. You're suggesting espionage? Malcolm shrugged. Nothing so dramatic or prosecutable. Think of it as influence farming. Kessler's firm benefits enormously from inside information about military procurement and deployment schedules. Having a network of grateful military spouses and bitter ex-officers creates opportunities. Riker processed this information with the same cool detachment he applied to battlefield intelligence. I need names. The other officers and their spouses. Already compiled, Malcolm said, passing a secured tablet across the bar. What I can't figure out is your endgame here, Riker. You're moving resources, collecting intelligence, positioning assets. But for what? Revenge? Reconciliation? Riker's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm creating a choice. For your wife. For everyone involved. Riker finished his drink. People make choices every day without understanding their true cost. I'm going to educate them. Over the next 2 weeks, Riker methodically contacted each of the officers on Malcolm's list. Some were bitter. Some had rebuilt their lives. Others were still struggling with the aftermath of betrayal. Each conversation provided additional pieces to the puzzle of Barrett Kessler's operation. One name in particular stood out. Mason Holt, a former Marine Corps colonel whose career had been destroyed after his wife left him for Kessler's business partner. Unlike the others, Holt hadn't just lost his marriage. He'd lost his reputation, his security clearance, and nearly his freedom when falsified evidence implicated him in a contract steering investigation. They set me up completely, Holt told Riker when they met at a fishing cabin in rural Tennessee. Now working as a high school history teacher, Holt's once commanding presence had diminished, but his eyes still burned with unresolved anger. When I wouldn't go quietly, they manufactured evidence. If it hadn't been for one loyal JAG officer, I'd have done time. Why didn't you fight back? Riker asked. Holt's bitter laugh held no humor. With what? My reputation was in tatters, my finances drained by legal fees. And they made it clear that if I kept pushing, my daughter would suffer the consequences. Your daughter, Riker said quietly. Did she turn against you too? The question hit a nerve. Holt stared into the distance. They poisoned her against me. Told her I was abusive, unstable from PTSD, dangerous. By the time the dust settled, she wouldn't even take my calls. His voice broke slightly. She's in college now. Still won't speak to me. After leaving Holt, Riker made a detour to visit a small law office in Nashville. The attorney, Lloyd Prentice, had been recommended by Lane as someone with experience in both military law and unconventional problem-solving. What you're proposing skirts several legal boundaries, Prentice warned after hearing Riker's evolving plan. But crosses none of them, Riker countered. The attorney conceded with a reluctant nod. Technically correct. It's not illegal to create a series of financial and legal tripwires that will make their lives increasingly difficult. It's not illegal to document the pattern of behavior across multiple officers' families. It's not even illegal to set up the particular corporate structure you're describing. He leaned forward. But the combination is effective, Riker finished. I was going to say merciless. Riker didn't flinch. They showed no mercy. Why should I? Meanwhile, Cassidy Sullivan sat alone in her room, scrolling through old family photos on her phone. Pictures of her father teaching her to fish, helping with homework, attending her school plays. Images that conflicted with the narrative she had been fed over the past 2 years. Barrett and her mother had painted a picture of an absent father who prioritized military glory over family, who was controlling and emotionally distant. They described a failing marriage that had existed in name only for years. Yet these photos told a different story. So did the birthday cards and letters her father had faithfully sent from every deployment. Correspondence, she now realized, had sometimes been delayed or lost in the mail, according to her mother. She tried calling her father again, but like the previous 17 attempts, it went straight to voicemail. What Cassidy didn't know was that Riker saw every call, read every text, but was waiting. For what? Even he wasn't entirely sure. Chapter 6. Pressure Points. 63 days after walking out of his former home, Riker Sullivan sat across from Audrey in the neutral territory of a mediator's office. It was their first face-to-face meeting since his disastrous homecoming. Audrey had aged in those 2 months. Fine lines had appeared around her eyes, and her normally perfect appearance showed subtle signs of strain. Barrett Kessler sat beside her, attempting to project confidence despite the increasingly concerning developments in their situation. "This is a straightforward divorce case," Kessler began, his tone professionally detached, as if he weren't personally involved. "We should be able to reach an equitable settlement without prolonged." "I'm not here to discuss divorce terms," Riker interrupted calmly. Audrey's carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. "Then why did you finally agree to this meeting?" "To deliver a message and a choice." Riker's voice remained measured, his posture relaxed yet alert, the stance of a predator conserving energy. He placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside is documentation of the systematic pattern through which Mr. Kessler has targeted the families of military officers in sensitive positions over the past decade. Names, dates, financial transactions, communication records. There's also an analysis of how information gleaned from these relationships coincided with advantageous contract bids and strategic decisions by Mr. Kessler's clients. Kessler's face drained of color. "That's absurd. I'll sue you for defamation." "By all means," Riker replied. "Discovery would be fascinating." Riker turned his attention back to Audrey. "I've also included documentation of how our family finances were manipulated during my deployments. Not just the obvious transfers, but the sophisticated structure created to leverage my military service for your private benefit." Audrey's eyes flashed with anger and fear. "You abandoned us emotionally years ago. Your precious military always came first." "Perhaps," Riker acknowledged, surprising them both. "I served my country faithfully, and that required sacrifices from all of us. But service and sacrifice don't justify betrayal." He stood, straightening his civilian jacket with the same precision he would his uniform. "You have a choice to make. Option 1. We proceed with a divorce under terms I've outlined in that envelope. They're not punitive, but they're non-negotiable. You both walk away with your reputations and careers intact, if somewhat diminished." "And option 2?" Kessler asked, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "I released this information through multiple channels simultaneously: military authorities, bar associations, current and former clients, media outlets specializing in military affairs. I've prepared detailed packages tailored to each recipient's interests." "That's blackmail," Kessler sputtered. "No," Riker corrected him. "Blackmail involves a demand for money or benefits. I'm simply offering you the professional courtesy of addressing these concerning patterns privately before my ethical obligation to report them becomes unavoidable." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You have 72 hours to decide. Oh, and I'd like to speak with my daughter. Alone. That's non-negotiable regardless of which option you choose." After he left, Audrey rounded on Barrett. "You said he was a simple soldier. You said he'd be easily managed." Kessler was already scanning the documents Riker had left, his face growing paler with each page. "This isn't possible. He couldn't have assembled this much information so quickly connected these dots. But he had. Moreover, Riker had done something even more dangerous. He had created a legal entity that now controlled significant aspects of their financial future. The structure was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. They weren't ruined, but they were contained within a system of Riker's design. Neither of them slept that night. By morning, they had reached the inevitable conclusion that the terms Riker offered, while painful, were preferable to the alternative. What they didn't realize was that regardless of their choice, certain mechanisms had already been activated, tripwires crossed, dominoes set in motion. The full scope of Operation Homecoming was larger than either of them imagined. Chapter 7. Truth and Consequences. Cassidy Sullivan hugged her knees to her chest in the corner booth of the quiet coffee shop. She'd received a text with an address and time, nothing more. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to maintain the angry distance that had become her shield. Another part desperately needed answers. When her father walked in, she barely recognized him. The military-precise haircut was gone, replaced by a slightly longer style. He wore casual clothes instead of a uniform, and moved with a relaxed confidence she hadn't seen in years. "Thanks for coming," Riker said, sitting across from her. "Mom and Barrett don't know I'm here," she replied defensively. "I know." The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until Cassidy blurted out, "Why did you just leave like that? Why haven't you answered my calls?" Riker studied her for a long moment. "I needed time to understand what had happened and why. As for your calls, they came after 17 days of silence. By then, I'd made certain decisions." "So you punished me?" "No. I removed myself from a toxic situation to gain perspective. There's a difference." Cassidy's eyes welled with tears. "They told me you never really wanted to be part of our family. That the military was your real family." Riker's expression softened marginally. "Your mother and Barrett have been systematically alienating you from me for nearly 2 years. Every deployment, every training exercise, every required absence was reframed as abandonment. Each time I was away defending others, they were undermining my relationship with you. That's not true." Riker placed a tablet on the table and turned it toward her. "This contains every communication I sent you during my last deployment. Every letter, every email, every video message. It also contains the altered versions your mother shared with you, when she shared them at all." Cassidy stared at the device, fear and uncertainty crossing her face. "The truth is uncomfortable," Riker acknowledged. "But necessary. I never stopped being your father, Cassidy. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my daughter." The harshness of these words hit her like physical pain. "That's not fair." "Perhaps not. You were manipulated by adults you trusted. But you're 16 now, old enough to start taking responsibility for your choices and their consequences." "What consequences?" "You're the one who disappeared." Riker's gaze was steady. "Your college fund parameters have changed. Your trust fund structure has been modified. Your mother and Barrett's financial circumstances are evolving. These aren't punishments. They're natural outcomes of their actions and your participation in them." "So you are punishing me," she accused. "I'm teaching you that actions have consequences." He leaned forward. "You said I was a useless loser. You told me to get lost. I simply took you at your word and adjusted our relationship accordingly." Tears spilled down Cassidy's cheeks. "I didn't mean it. They told me you were coming home to try to control us, to stop Mom from being happy. And you believed them without question, without giving me the chance to say a single word." Riker's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes made Cassidy realize how deeply she had wounded him. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "That depends on you. I've arranged for you to spend weekends with my sister Lucy if you choose. She's agreed to provide neutral territory while you sort through the information I've given you and decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with me." He stood to leave, placing a business card on the table. "This has my current contact information. I'll answer if you call, but I expect honesty and respect. Nothing less." As he walked away, Cassidy called after him, "Dad." "I'm sorry." Riker paused but didn't turn around. "Prove it," he said quietly, and continued walking. Meanwhile, Audrey and Barrett were discovering the full implications of the divorce terms they had reluctantly accepted. The agreement Riker had crafted was a masterpiece of controlled consequences. Audrey retained partial ownership of her marketing firm, but discovered that major clients were mysteriously choosing not to renew contracts. Barrett maintained his partnership at his law firm, but found himself excluded from the military contract cases that had been his specialty. The properties they had acquired using Riker's military benefits and salary were placed in a specialized trust. They could continue living in the main residence, but could not sell or leverage the properties without triggering clauses that would expose the questionable financial structure used to acquire them. Most disturbingly, they began receiving courteous but firm communications from the other military spouses and officers Kessler had targeted over the years. It became apparent that Riker had created a network of his own, a coalition of the betrayed who now watched their every professional move with informed interest. "He's systematically dismantling our lives," Audrey realized one evening, staring at their dwindling bank account. "No," Barrett corrected grimly. "He's controlling them. There's a difference." Chapter 8. The Unbroken. Mason Holt stared at the young woman sitting across from him in the small campus cafe. His daughter, Riley, looked both familiar and like a stranger after 4 years of complete separation. "I don't understand why you wanted to meet now," she said, her posture defensive, her tone wary. Mason placed a thick folder on the table. "Someone sent me this 2 weeks ago. It contains proof that the allegations against me were fabricated. Evidence that your mother and Richard conspired with Barrett Kessler to destroy my career and reputation when I discovered their financial improprieties." Riley's eyes widened. That's crazy. Mom said you were unstable, that you made up conspiracies because of your PTSD. "Read it," Mason urged gently. "All of it. Then decide for yourself." As Riley began examining the documents, financial records, email exchanges, sworn statements from witnesses, Mason's phone buzzed with a text message. Phase 2 complete. Proceeding to final stage. R. Across the country, similar scenes were playing out. Former officers reconnecting with estranged children. Military spouses discovering unsettling truths about their partner's activities. Clients quietly distancing themselves from Kessler's law firm as rumors of ethical breaches circulated in professional circles. None of it was loud or dramatic. No public accusations, no scandalous headlines. Just quiet, persistent pressure applied precisely where it would cause maximum effect. Riker Sullivan observed these developments from his new home, a modest but comfortable house near a military training facility where he had accepted a position as a tactical instructor. He maintained a detailed record of each outcome, each reconciliation, each small justice achieved. His phone rang. Cassidy, calling from her weekend stay with his sister. "I found my 8th grade yearbook," she said without preamble. "The one with that note you wrote me before deploying. Mom told me you never even signed it." Riker closed his eyes briefly, remembering the 4-page letter he had carefully pinned in the back of his daughter's yearbook before a particularly dangerous deployment. Words of encouragement, advice, and love in case he didn't return. "I wrote it in case something happened to me," he acknowledged. "You wrote that no matter what happened, you'd never stop being my dad." Her voice broke slightly. "Did you mean it?" "Every word." A pause. "Barrett's moving out. Mom's been crying for days. Everything's falling apart." "Not falling apart," Riker corrected. "Realigning to truth. Would you consider forgiving Mom? Maybe we could try to be a family again." Riker's voice, when he finally answered, was gentle but unyielding. "No, Cassidy. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some choices have permanent consequences. But she's suffering. Yes, actions have consequences. That was always the risk she took." After ending the call, Riker opened his laptop and checked the secure messaging system he had established with his network of fellow betrayed officers. Reports continued to flow in, each confirming another successful outcome in what had become a coordinated campaign of controlled justice. Later that evening, he received an unexpected call from Barrett Kessler. "Sullivan," the lawyer said, his once confident voice now strained, "I underestimated you." "Significantly." "Yes," Riker agreed simply. "This campaign you've orchestrated, it's brilliant and terrifying. My practice is disintegrating. My reputation is in tatters. Former clients won't take my calls." "Consequences," Riker reminded him. "I want to make a deal," Kessler said desperately. "Something beyond the divorce terms. A way to make this stop." "There is no deal, Barrett. No negotiation. No escape clause." Riker's voice remained calm. "You're experiencing exactly what you inflicted on others. The systematic dismantling of what you valued most. The difference is that I'm allowing you to keep your freedom, which is more mercy than you showed to men like Mason Holt. Please, Kessler's voice cracked. What do you want from me? Nothing. That's what makes this perfect. I want absolutely nothing from you except the knowledge that every morning when you wake up, you'll remember what you did and understand that your current circumstances are the direct result of your own choices. Riker ended the call and turned his attention to the final phase of Operation Homecoming. Chapter 9, The Final Word. 1 year to the day after his disastrous homecoming, Riker Sullivan sat in the office of General Miranda Callahan, the recently appointed head of a special oversight committee investigating contract irregularities in military procurement. Your information has been invaluable, Major Sullivan, the general said, closing a file folder bearing classified markings. Though your methods of obtaining it were unorthodox, I operated within legal parameters, General, Riker replied evenly. By the narrowest of margins. Her expression was a mixture of disapproval and reluctant admiration. 7 indictments so far. 3 law firms under investigation. 15 military contracts under review. The ripple effects will continue for years. Justice often has a long tail, ma'am. General Callahan studied him thoughtfully. This began as personal revenge for your wife's infidelity. It evolved into something much more significant. With respect, General, it was never just about infidelity. It was about systematic betrayal, exploitation of military families, and abuse of trust. My personal situation simply gave me the motivation and perspective to recognize the larger pattern. She nodded slowly. Your former wife has requested a meeting. She's submitted evidence that could be valuable to our investigation. I'm aware. She contacted me as well. And I declined the meeting. The general raised an eyebrow. Still punishing her? No, ma'am. Simply maintaining appropriate boundaries. Our relationship is now limited to necessary communications regarding our daughter. Nothing more. After leaving the Pentagon, Riker drove to a small park where Cassidy waited on a bench, her expression anxious. At 17, she looked older than her years, the events of the past year having stripped away much of her adolescent defiance. How was the campus tour? Riker asked, sitting beside her. The Virginia Military Institute is intense, she admitted. But I liked it. Their engineering program is impressive. You don't have to choose a military academy, Cassidy. The trust fund conditions include any college with an ROTC program. She shook her head. This is what I want. On my own terms. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before Cassidy spoke again. Mom asked me to talk to you again. About maybe forgiving her, meeting with her. My answer hasn't changed. She's different now? Humbled. She's volunteering with military family support groups, trying to make amends. I'm glad to hear that, Riker said sincerely. Growth from consequences is the best possible outcome. But forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. I can release my anger without re-establishing a relationship that proved harmful. Cassidy nodded slowly. I understand better now. About boundaries and consequences. She hesitated. You've never asked me to choose between you and Mom. And I never will. She's your mother, regardless of her failings as my wife. Your relationship with her is yours to define. Later that evening, Riker received a text from Malcolm. Final reports confirmed. Operation complete on all fronts. Casualties minimal. Objectives achieved. Riker sent a single word in response. Understood. In his new home, Riker Sullivan added a final entry to the journal he had maintained throughout the ordeal. Unlike the previous entries, which documented betrayals and tactical responses, this one was different. A reflection on the nature of justice, forgiveness, and the hard-won peace that comes not from forgetting wrongs, but from ensuring they cannot be repeated. He had lost a wife, but regained his integrity. He had been betrayed by family, but created a network of loyal allies united by shared experience. He had been treated as disposable, but had demonstrated his indispensable value. The phone on his desk buzzed with yet another message from Audrey, her 18th attempt to arrange a face-to-face meeting in the past month. Like the others, it would go unanswered. Some understood the message the first time. Others required more extensive education. But eventually, everyone learned the lesson that Major Riker Sullivan had mastered through years of combat in a single devastating betrayal. Actions have consequences. Choices are permanent. And true strength lies not in forgiveness, but in the courage to enforce the boundaries that preserve one's dignity and honor. Outside, A thunderstorm rolled in, but inside his home, his true home now, Riker Sullivan was finally at peace.